Hi everyone, welcome to Pedigree Radio. This is your host, Jared Gallnitz. We have another exciting live show for you tonight. We will cover a couple pedigrees to start. Then we will have equine behavior author Kerry Thomas and his associate, Mr. Pete Denk, of Thomas Herding Technique and THT Bloodstock. We will take your calls at the tail end of the guest's interview. You can call into the show by dialing 859-328-6566. Again, that is 859-328-6566. Please clearly state your name and question for the call screener. I'd like to give a sincere thanks to all the guests we've had on the show up to this point. Mike Palms, Byron Rogers, Alan Porter, and today, Kerry Thomas and Pete Denk. I would also like to give thanks to the many listeners who have tuned into the show. In just 4 short weeks, we have listeners on every inhabited continent except for Asia. So if you have any connections in Asia that might be interested in the show, please reach out to them to share our show information with them. We look forward to having them tune in. So let's jump right into the pedigrees for this week. And I would like to cover Elate, who is the winner of the Grade 2 Delaware Handicap. Elate is also a Grade 1 winner, winning the Alabama and many other major races. So Elate is by Medaglia d'Oro, and she's out of the Distorted Humor mare Cheery, who is by AP Indy. And to start off, Medaglia d'Oro brings a return of La Troyenne to Distorted Humor. So not only that, but we also have another, we have a double top and bottom of Jeddah. And it is interesting to note that Medaglia d'Oro also carries My Babu, who also carries Tourbillon. And, you know, that brings a lot of the Vandal across that has really benefited Distorted Humor and any line breeding to Domino. So, another big thing to note is that this particular filly, Elate, is also directly from the female line of La Troyenne herself. So bringing in La Troyenne gives 4 lines of La Troyenne on the bottom and at least one on the top side who's brought in through Bimelech. And so you have both male and female crosses of La Troyenne. The male La Troyenne comes through Silent Screen, who is out of a Better Self mare. Better Self being the inverse cross of Striking and Busher, found in AP Indy multiple times through both Seattle Slew and AP Indy. And there are also doubles of Rabot to kind of hammer down the stamina side of the equation on this. Lots of Hail to Reason all throughout, lots of Bold Ruler, so there's plenty of speed that was also infused into this pedigree. One thing to remember is that La Troyenne is a deep source of classic speed. So this is speed that, we define as speed that can be carried over a great distance of ground. And, that's not to be taken lightly. I know there's a lot of sprinter speed that is bred for a lot nowadays. And the racing secretaries at a lot of tracks card a lot of sprint races because they feel that's the contingency of horses that they have at their track, and maybe rightfully so. But if you take a look at the pedigrees, especially of the Medaglia d'Oro, Distorted Humor, they tend to go long, at least be able to carry their speed 1 1/8 miles, if not 1 1/4 miles in some cases. 1 1/16 miles is typical for these types for Medaglia d'Oro. Another pedigree I want to get into is U.S. Navy. And give me a moment while I pull that up. My mistake, it's U.S. Navy flag. U.S. Navy flag is a son of Warfront. And Warfront is also bred a lot like Tappet in many ways, coming from the Moon Glitter Ruby Slippers line. And so you get this Warfront Galileo cross that brings in Buck Passer, also leverages the Nazrilla Prince Aquilo cross, and also brings in multiple lines of Latroin through Fabiano and Dr. Feger, brings in the Axe, who is also a male descendant of Latroin herself, and then you get a lot of this return of Leilun, and she is a daughter of Jeddah, who we see a lot lately, and then out of a Bimelech daughter. So again, a male Latroin, a male strain of Latroin crossed on a lot of Latroin's daughters, Latroin. And then you also get lots of sex balance of Prince Aquilo in the mix as well. So this is once again an interesting cross. Mainly he's mainly a turf runner, but certainly has a lot of dirt influences in the pedigree. U.S. Navy flag won the Middle Park Stakes, the Dewhurst Group 1, and also the Group 3 Round Tower Stakes. And he's set to try for the Everest Stakes, and that's certainly another race that he can certainly put under his belt. And so let me find one more here. So we're going to go to, let's take a look at Golden Brown here. Golden Brown won the Grade 3 Kent Stakes at Delaware Park. Golden Brown is by Awfully Wild, who is out of the Seattle Slew mare named Alviar, and by Chester House. And to remind, Chester House is the full brother to Empire Maker. Actually, half brother, 3/4 brother to Empire Maker. So with that comes, again, in reality, Buck Passer. Looks like the mare Susie Sunrise has doubled the Buck Passer, both through daughter strains, and following kind of a zigzag pattern that you want to see when Buck Passer is being doubled. And Awfully Wild, so there's Latroin that comes from that doubling of Buck Passer. There's 2 more that come from Seattle Slew, and the full sisters Striking and Busher from Seattle Slew's Damn My Charmer. And then more Rabeau, and then there's also this tail female line in Awfully Wild of Olympia, and we've mentioned Olympia a couple times, and to see the male and female strains come through there. Olympia was certainly an influence in California Chrome multiple times, was also an influence in the dam of American Pharoah, Little Princess Emma. And so, there's a lot to be said about Awfully Wild maybe looking for more returns of Olympia, although it's not present here. Olympia seems to really feed off of La Troyenne, and then this is also the family of Dynaformer as well. So Awfully Wild certainly has a chance to do well with Dynaformer line mares, and with this particular colt, I would look to have more Seattle Slew with APND, and would also like to see maybe some Unbridled in there to kind of double to kind of complement Chester House, and also see some Empire Maker in there. Chester House and Empire Maker were both out of the Blue Hen Mare 2 sold. And so we're looking to get our guests on here, and so we're going to try to get them out here, try to get them into the call. If you could bear with us one moment. Here we go. Okay, I sent our guests some incomplete information about the dial-in for the show, so hopefully we'll get them on here in a few minutes. And until then, we'll go over a little more pedigree here. So we'll take a look at Kew Gardens. Pardon the typing in the background here. Kew Gardens is a Galileo. So again, we get more Buck Passer, and out of a Desert King mare named Chelsea Rose. Desert King also brings back returns of Buck Passer, loaded with Natalma blood. So Natalma was the dam of Northern Dancer, but also the third dam of Dane Hill. And looks like they've pretty well loaded this pedigree up with Northern Dancer and lots of other lines of Natalma. Looks like we have a double of Special, who is the second dam of Sadler's Wells, and also the dam of Nureyev, also found in King Mambo, I believe. And so we'd like to see maybe some King Mambo blood brought back into this into the pedigree here. Special could also be found in I believe Dynaformer. We take a look here and verify that. King Mambo is by Mr. Prospector out of Miesk. And so, so King Mambo is out of a Nureyev mare and therefore carrying Special. I thought Dynaformer was carrying, but I guess not. There is a. Let me take a look here, and let's see here. So Sadler's Wells and Nureyev, so King Mambo, and that's where you get the cross of special, and that has worked in a couple different instances that I've seen. We're still waiting on our guest to arrive. But actually, it looks like we have one here. And hello, looks like we have one of our guests on the line. Who's on the phone with us?
This is Pete from THT.
Hi, Pete. How you doing? You're on the air. If you could,
I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty hearing you guys.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Can you hear me now, Pete?
I can hear you. It's a little bit distorted though, but maybe we're good.
Okay. All right. Let me double check something here. Okay. Here we go. Is that better now? All right. Can you hear me, Pete?
I can hear you now. Great.
Okay. It looks like Terry has also joined us here.
Jared, are you there?
Carrie, can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Great. And we also have Pete on the line. And so,
fantastic. All right.
All right. I would like to welcome officially now Mr. Kerry Thomas and Mr. Pete Dank of THT Bloodstock and the Thomas herding technique. And how are you guys, gentlemen, doing tonight?
Good, Jared. How about yourself?
Great. Thank you. So, my first question for you is, for those not familiar with your work, what is the Thomas herding technique?
Well, the Thomas herding technique actually is a reference to herd dynamic profiling and psychological study of the horses. And it's an interesting story about how I come up with that name. I'll give you a little quick background on that. I had a long time ago, when all this was at its infancy years and years ago, I had a close friend of mine who used to give me a hard time as he would see me out in the field with horses. And he would tease me, and he'd say, "Thomas, what kind of herding technique crap are you doing out there?" Just joking around. And I always thought it was kind of funny. Well, fast forward a year or so from that point in time, and he had passed away at a young age. And so when I embarked on the journey of studying horses and studying horse psychology and herd dynamics and behavioral genetics, I kept that name in honor of him. And then over the years, when Pete and I got together, I just shortened it down to THT, but I kept that really in reference to the study of the herd dynamics as given to me by a lost friend.
Great. And, I mentioned to you in an email, Kerry, that one time I was at a race at my local track, and there was a horse that was on the lead heading for the wire, and there was another horse that was closing in very fast on him, and I think physically could have possibly been able to overtake that other horse without a whole lot of problem, except for the fact that the horse in the lead gave the horse charging at him a very dirty look with his eyes, pinned his ears, and the other horse just quit. And,
Right.
I wasn't really, I had seen your book. I had even purchased it on Amazon for the Kindle edition, and I really wasn't sure how much there was to it until I saw that race happen. And that, from that point forward, I thought to myself, there's something to this. And, if you could just kind of let me know and let our listeners know different instances where you see that play out, or, if that is a frequent occurrence where herd dynamics can take over the outcome of a race, and how often do you see it?
Well, and Pete can speak to this. We study a lot of races, and it is a very inherent part of the herd structure. And, horses are herd animals, and I always say in nature, I always estimated this roughly about 85% of horses are within what I call the middle of the herd dynamic. And that means that they have some sort of dependency / codependency of one to the other for the strengths and weaknesses that allows the whole herd to actually survive. Just for hypothetical, if I have a weak interpretation on my right-hand side, but I'm strong on the left, I'm going to position myself so that my weak side is where your strong side is, essentially. So it's going to be, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. And these things are very profound. They're very subtle in a herd setting. A lot of times, it's kind of hard to see, but when you put horses in motion, it begins to shuffle itself out, especially over more distance, and where the physical athlete begins to have to hand itself over to the psychological athlete. And these things play a vital role in every part of the horse's life, so it's going to certainly have an effect on competition. And as you climb higher in the herd dynamics, which is a horse that is what Pete and I always talk about, a more sensory sound, more efficient psychology with less herd dependencies. In other words, they can create their own separation. They can make their own decisions without having to ask, a peer to fill in a gap, or the jockey or rider, or whatever the case may be. As you climb higher and higher in these ranks, the elite potential horses, they can separate themselves from the herd, and you're entering into the 5%, 1% the higher you go. And point of the fact is, in nature, you can have 8 horses, but you need one male leader and one female leader for the herd to survive. And then there's a structure down below that, and each is dependent upon the other to a larger or lesser degree in that structure for survival. Just because we've taken the horse out of that natural environment doesn't mean we've taken the natural environment propensity out of the horse. So this application is very, very important. And like I always tell people, I always say, with the horse, you're not just getting the physical athlete. It's not like going to the car lot and picking out a great, beautiful car. You also are getting the car and the driver. So the physical application and the physical efficiency is only going to be optimized to the ability of the psychology.
Great. Just if you could, are there any horses in recent memory that personify the quote-unquote ideal behavioral confirmation that you would seek out in a racing prospect?
I'll let Pete take that one, because we were just talking about this recently, and we're studying some horses this morning. And Pete, you have a much better memory for names than I do.
When we talk about like an ideal profile, I don't think there is one just ideal profile. What we have is horses that we term elite, I guess you could say. Our best personal example would probably be Run Happy. He was a horse that we aided the buyer, James Mackingvale, Gallery Racing, of buying as a yearling, and we identified a lot of special traits in him. So he's our best example of a horse that we've bought that basically we almost gave a perfect score to when we analyzed him as a yearling. There's been quite a few more since then, but I really like him as an example due to our involvement in him.
Great. I guess this, when you mentioned earlier that there's no one ideal, so if a horse is lacking certain behavioral traits that you look for, kind of like physical confirmation, there are physical confirmation faults that can be overlooked, forgiven, when somebody's judging physical confirmation on a horse. If a horse is lacking certain behavioral traits that you look for, how many of those can be taught to the horse through tailored training, handling, and also exercise?
Well, Jerry, this is a question we get asked often, and whenever I do a seminar or clinic, this is a question that always comes up. And the simple fact is, I always tell folks, well, the number one thing you have to remember is, you can't change who the horse is. However, you can work on the strengths and the weaknesses to make them a better version of themselves. It's just much like a human being in a lot of ways. And you can work through a lot of issues through learned behaviors and through, what I always say, coaching. To me, there's 2 different types of approaching a horse. Training, for me, is more of a physical aspect. Coaching is a psychological aspect. And I always say, you nurture the horse while you develop the athlete, and you bring those 2 things together. Sometimes the psychology is ahead of the body, sometimes the body is ahead of the psychology. And training and coaching is the merge of those 2 things together. And there's very few horses that have the complete package. There's many horses. Most horses are going to have what I call a sensory pothole or some kind of dependency in the psychology that may not rear its ugly head until the moment you're trying to cast another horse, or something like that. And there are certain things you can do because horses learn very well by association. And this is a natural thing because, in nature, they have to learn to associate different things with different things. Like they have to be able to tell the difference between a sagebrush going across the prairie and a mountain lion chasing them, or else they're going to be running, all the time. So there has to be a process, and this happens over time. And you can circumvent some of these weaknesses, but you cannot erase them. And a lot of times, once you identify in our profiling process, we're looking for the strengths and the weaknesses in the psyche, in the natural tendencies under stress, and how that's affecting their performance. Because not every issue is an actual issue for the performance intended. It depends a lot on what you're looking to do. Now, in racing, what you need to have is very fast and very efficient what I call sensory lead changes. And what that means is, because the horse is moving through herd or around the herd or against the rail, whatever the case may be, coming out of the gate, there's a lot of rapid interpretations that have to take place in order for the body to remain efficient. And if they can't interpret faster than the body's moving, you're going to create drag. You're going to create delays in the response times. Well, we all know that when they're running, 40 miles an hour at whatever distance, a split second of what I call drag between those two is half a length sometimes, or a length, or however fast you're going. It can be the difference between first and third, first and fourth, or whatever. And depending on how severe these issues are, it really is dependent upon how much you can work through that, and kind of speed these things up. You can't erase that it's there, but you're trying to bridge it through other means.
Okay, great. So, our show mainly centers around breeding and bloodline theories. So when you're selecting a mare for breeding, does the mare pass on her behavioral confirmation to her foals? And what portion of that behavioral confirmation comes from the sire and what portion comes from the dam?
I mean, proportionally speaking, I don't know what the numbers would be. I mean, it can be random at different times. Some horses influence stronger than others, and some mare, the brood mare is oftentimes a forgotten hero in the breeding game, because to me she's such a vital, important aspect, because she's has to be complementary to the male or vice versa, but she's also going to be in charge of imparting a lot of youth training, when the horse is first born, and how she's going to be, what type of mother that she is. This is very important. And Pete and I were doing some profiling this morning for a potential new stallion, and there are very key elements to the behavioral genetic sequence that we're looking for the male and the female, and what they're going to pass along forward. Pete, you have some more thoughts on this, since we were talking this morning about a stallion.
Yeah, I mean, to Jared's first question is does a horse pass on its behavioral confirmation to its progeny? And the answer is not necessarily. It's more likely to than not, but just like in physical confirmation and all the other genetic traits, like there are things that are expressed physically in a horse, and then there's this other set that potentially get passed down. So you can't see everything at the surface. It's not that easy. But we do see a lot of patterns. That being said, especially, you get to see a lot more progeny of a stallion, obviously, than you get to see progeny of a specific broodmare. So statistically, you get a much better sample. And we see tons of patterns in these stallions that stamp behaviorally.
Okay, so I guess my follow-up to that is: do any of these traits get passed down? We study a lot of inbreeding and line breeding. Have you seen any effect on inbreeding for those particular traits?
I don't think that I don't think we've gone back, 4 or 5 generations and yet figured out that, whatever key ancestor, we've seen good things like La Troyenne and pedigrees, but I don't think we're to the point where we can say a certain level of inbreeding is doing this to behavioral traits. I think our studies have been more up close in the pedigrees, we're very focused on the commercial market. So stallions are probably, that's probably our number one focus. But we've seen little things like, I know that I've noticed Stormcat, who's obviously an extremely influential stallion and a horse that you see in absolutely tons of American pedigrees. I have a little theory there. He brings out the speed and the grit and the gameness in a lot of his progeny. And now it's interesting to follow because we're seeing Stormcat going back a couple generations in pedigrees and kind of seeing how that plays down the generations.
Okay. I guess that leads me to another question. Fabiano keeps coming up as well, and I remember reading an account that when John Narrowed was planning the mating for Unbridled, and when he was watching Unbridled work as a young 2-year-old, he would say, "Hey, he's clocking his opponents just like Fabiano would." Meaning that, he would lay back, but Fabiano would know, he knew where the wire was and would know when it was his time to catch up to them and eventually pass them for the lead. Is this something you see a lot in the racing dynamics?
Yeah, for me, I was just going to say, I think that there's a lot of, we see a lot of patterns of behavior and the strengths, shining through on certain family lines when it comes to the stallions, especially that we've studied. And these influences are, they're very profound, and it all has to work together. It's just not, it's a big piece of a jigsaw puzzle all over the place. You have the physical, the pedigree, which is very important. You have the psychology, which is very important. And these things all have their influences and importance. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Pete.
I was just going to comment on the specifics of the pedigree question. I know along the lines of Fabiano, we've seen a lot of good traits coming through unbridled broodmares. Unbridled is a son of Fabiano, obviously. And I know that we've seen a lot of really good emotional energy distribution over distance being passed down through unbridled mares, Jared.
Yeah, I know he's a big one, and a broodmare sire that we've seen a lot lately, especially on the Belmont Undercard Day and in the Belmont itself, was Deputy Minister. Do you have any info on Deputy Minister as far as behavioral confirmation is concerned?
I don't have any specific notes on him other than, I like to see it in a pedigree. I don't know of any specific behavioral traits. Sometimes it's just, you kind of see the names there and they seem to express speed well, perhaps, or they bring out racing class in horses. Carrie, have you noticed anything on Deputy Minister specifically?
No, I mean, nothing really specifically except for it's a very consistent, what I call a faster cycle psychology. And, there's the psychological spin on horses is different for each horse. And what that means is, how fast their interpretation process is and how fast their psychology is spinning in the environment is very either adaptable or not adaptable to sudden changes and chaos. One of the main things is a horse has to be able to adapt to situational chaos while in motion, while under stress. And some horses can do that better over a long period of time at not a faster speed per se. Some horses are equipped to do it very rapidly, but their physical stamina and their psychological stamina begins to wear out over a certain period of time. And I think that for him, it seems to be a very consistent rhythm to that psychology. That's pretty much the main thing I can say about that.
Great. So, I think, there's quite a bit for, people to chew on here, but how can people get a hold of you if they're interested in more of your work?
Or they can visit our website, thtbloodstock.com, and each year for the last 8 years we've done a Kentucky Derby evaluation and profile report, a patterns of motion report on the herd dynamics of the breakdown. They can see that in Toolbar Big Race Analysis section if they want to check that out, and they can also look at the blog and see a few things on there that might interest them.
Okay, great. And what different sales do you guys cover?
Pete, you're the sale guru.
Well, what was the question, Jared?
Which of the different sales do you guys cover for yearlings, 2-year-olds? If you attend the mixed sales, what sales can people hire you for?
We really go to all types of sales. Anywhere we have a client who's interested in thinking about the sensory soundness, the mental side of the equine athlete, the emotional side. We have something to contribute in just about any area, whether you're buying an unraced horse, a weanling, a yearling, or a 2-year-old, or if you're trying to buy a mare. So, the answer to that is we go to all types of sales.
Great. So just wanted to give my thank you to Mr. Kerry Thomas and Mr. Pete Dank of THT Bloodstock, and I just want to say thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Jared, thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
No problem. Take care, guys. Thank you.
All right, see you.
See you. And that was Kerry Thomas and Pete Dank of THT Bloodstock. So we get quite a different spin on the on the matings between stallions and mares. That really is a departure from what we normally study as pedigree analysts. But I felt it was one that was worth bringing onto the show because I think it plays a key role in the outcome of the races. And at the end of the day, like I said in my first episode, this show is not about the beauty contest at the sales. It's not about betting, but certainly this can be very useful in helping you select a good runner for your program. So I felt it deserved a show to highlight it. And just wanted to thank them again. And if you want, you can call into our line at 859-328-6566. We don't have any calls at this time, but I want to cover another pedigree that came up, and that is Alpha Centauri. This is quite a filly. She is by Master Craftsman, and out of the Rahi mare Alpha Lupi. And, this goes back to a cross that Alan Porter talked about last week, where, Blush and Groom typically had not done very well with Northern Dancer, but seemed to have a really good click with Leafard. And so, again, the Leafard Blush and Groom cross is at play here in this. La Troyenne is also in here. Herbaget, who is a member of Family 16, is in here. Sword Dancer is in here. My Babu, Jabel. You get more Tourbillon and going with La Troyenne. But I wanted to dissect the Blush and Groom Leafard cross. So I'm going to do a hypothetical mating on my pedigreequery.com account here, and let's see what this cross gives us, because it was worth noting. So both are tail male to Niarco, and what's interesting here is that there's a double of Tsar, at least a double. Let me blow this out to 6 generations here. And Tsar is, I believe, he's in the pedigree of Tourbillon as well. And so this is, certainly a cross worth looking at, because we see it now and then. So there's also Rebelles and crosses of Hyperion, multiples of Blenheim the second, and so you get also multiples of Celine, who is definitely a blue hen, and it takes a while to find out what's in this cross, but I'm going to go ahead and blow it out to 7 generations here and see what we get. To see more what's buried in there, because right off the bat it's not readily apparent what makes that cross click, but there is that double lady juror in there. There is a double of an ancestor named Chabursky, and who I, believe it or not, have not seen before. So it's always interesting to do these digs and deep dives in these pedigrees, when a cross like that comes about. So, I know we've explored the cross between Najimski and Buckpasser, and Najimski and In Reality, Buckpasser and In Reality, the different things that seem to be at play in the cross of, say, Tappet, and some of the horses that have done some of the mares that have done well with Tappet. So, but I just found it very interesting, that cross with the Blush and Groom Leafard cross that produced, I believe it was Gunrunner, and I'll find it here. And so, Gunrunner was a Leafard Blush and Groom double, but also, a double of Fabiano as well, who we talked about earlier in the program. Next week, we're going to take a look at some of the races coming up for Saratoga in the Spa, and also maybe take a look back at some of the big races that happened at Indiana Grand for the Indiana Derby, Indiana Oaks, and but look forward mostly ahead to the big meet at Saratoga in New York. So we're also working on getting some more guests on from WinStar. We also have a call out to John and Tanya Gunther, of course, breeders of Justify, and we also have a possibility lined up for next week with Cynthia McGinnis, who is the breeder of Grade 3 winner Still Having Fun, who scored big at Belmont. So I think that's all we have for today's show. And if you didn't catch us live, again, you can catch us on the replay at pedigreeradio.com. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Looks like we'll try to get Cynthia McGinnis, and we may also be joined by George Adams of Housatonic Bloodstock. So until next week, this is Jared Golnitz of Pedigree Radio. Have a good weekend.